The final item of business is members' business debate on motion 16000 in the name of Joan McAlpine on celebrating Hamish Henderson. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Joan McAlpine to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It gives me great pleasure to open this debate for the centenary of Dr Hamish Henderson, one of the most brilliant Scots of his age. Members might notice that a large number of people are in the public gallery to hear the Parliament pay tribute to Hamish, and they include his wife Ketzel, daughters Tina and Janet, and his grandson Steve. And I'd also like to welcome those attending from Celtic and Scottish Studies at the University of Edinburgh, who are supporting a celebratory event after the debate, along with the Hamish Matters Festival of Bergowrie and the Scottish Poetry Library. And I'm delighted that the Deputy First Minister will speak at that event, given his constituency interest and his great interest in this debate. The great American folk musician Pete Seeger once said that Hamish loved Scotland as much as he loved life itself. And he was right. Now Scotland is reciprocating that love with a flurry of events for this centenary. For many years, Hamish Henderson dominated Scotland's intellectual landscape. He linked the 1920s literary renaissance, spearheaded by that unapologetic elitist Hugh MacDiarmid, with the unapologetically egalitarian folk revival of the 1950s, of which Hamish was the driving force. His work with the School of Scottish Studies, recording and popularising the living tradition of Scotland, is unsurpassed. The singers and songs Hamish discovered inspired a generation of artists, including the young Bob Dylan. And like Robert Burns, Sir Walter Scott and James Hogg in previous centuries, Hamish collected, preserved and promoted the lives and concerns of otherwise invisible people in bothies, mills, fields and factories. And he added wonderful songs of his own. Hamish Henderson was born in Bergowrie a year after the armistice on the 11th of November 1919 to Janet, a single mother. His earliest years were spent in the Spittal of Glenshee, where he first learned to appreciate the songs that his mother pointed out could not be found in books. Poverty forced Janet to go into service in Somerset, but she died when Hamish was just 13, leaving him completely alone in the world. Hamish won a scholarship to Dulwich School in London, which he attended by day while living in an orphanage in Clapham in the evenings. He then went to Cambridge on another scholarship to study modern languages. From an early age, he had a strong sense of social justice. As a student, he spent summers in Germany, where he was horrified by Nazism and helped young Jewish people escape. During the war, he served with distinction as an intelligence officer in North Africa and Italy, where he collected ballads from the soldiers, including his captives, and wrote songs including the famous 51st Highland Division's Farewell to Sicily. Put in charge of one prisoner, Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, he helped write the order demanding the surrender of all Axis troops in Italy. He also had the job of liaising with Italy's anti-fascist partisans, and through them discovered the work of Antonio Gramsci, whose prison letters he later translated into English. His collection, Elegies for the Dead in Cyrenaica, is considered amongst the finest poetry of World War II, and it won the Somerset Maugham Prize in 1949. And he then assisted the American folklorist Alan Lomax in capturing Scotland's undiscovered traditional singers for Columbia Records with the latest technology, the reel-to-reel tape recorder. This is perhaps the defining event of his life, for Hamish went on to pursue this field collection work at the newly formed School of Scottish Studies at Edinburgh University, where he worked until his death in 2002, latterly as an honorary fellow. The School of Scottish Studies archive is one of the most important collections in Europe, an oral and visual record of the lives of Scotland's working people, their social conditions, customs, beliefs, songs and stories. Hamish's recordings are among the 33,000 held in the archives, around 10,000 of which are field recordings. Support from the lottery and other partners, including the Scottish Government, allowed online access from 2010 to a selection of extracts from the school's collection through Tovan and Dulchas and Kisterich's website. The university is exploring future approaches to providing online access for the collections, and we support them in this important work. Hamish recorded and popularised tradition bearers such as Jeannie Robertson in the North East, the berry-picking Stuarts of Blairgowrie, Aberdeenshire bothy singer Willie Matheson, and Jimmy Macbeth of Portsoy, a farm servant and wandering bard. There are many more. Some of the best singers were from the marginalised travelling community. Hamish lived among them as a true friend. And many of these singers performed at the People's Ceilidh he launched at the Edinburgh Festival in 1951 that marked the beginnings of the folk revival in Scotland. The singer-songwriter Adam McNaughton, writing in Chapman magazine in 1985, had this to say about Hamish's contribution. Three strands are distinguishable in the Scottish folklore revival: the academic, the club festival movement, and the traditional. And perhaps the only person who has striven to intertwine the three has been Dr. Henderson. Hamish believed it was important to add to the vibrant carrying stream of folk tradition with new work. This he did with great verve. His contributions include Farewell to Sicily, the John Maclean March, Rivonia, which called for the release of Nelson Mandela long before the world woke up to the true injustice of his imprisonment. And when Mandela came to Glasgow after his release, it was Hamish whom he embraced on stage. Freedom Come All You was written in 1960 for the protests against Polaris and the Clyde. It's sometimes suggested as a national anthem for Scotland, although I understand Hamish did not approve of that idea. It's an international anthem of peace. It condemns the impact of colonial wars, both on the working class Scots who fought them and the families in Africa and Asia who suffered as a consequence. He imagines an end to all this in verse 2. Nae mair will the bonny callants march to war when your braggarts cruisely craw, nor we wains frae Peathead and Clachan mourn the ship sailing down the broomy law. Broken families and lands we've herried will curse Scotland the brave, nae mair, nae mair. The song has been recorded and performed by dozens of artists, and it will be sung again in the Parliament tonight in a concert featuring different generations of singers, including Hamish's friends Margaret Bennett and Sheena Wellington, and for the younger generation, Mike Vaz of the School of Scottish Studies Archive and Pipe Major Callum Douglas of Hamish Matters have composed new work in Hamish's honour. Last month saw the launch of The Dark, a collection inspired by Hamish and edited by Jim McIntosh for the Poets Republic Press, and available today, I'm glad to say, from the Scottish Parliament shop. Next week, we will see a celebration by the Association of Scottish Literary Studies, and Hamish Matters itself takes place in Belgowrie in November, as does the Carrying Stream Festival in Edinburgh Folk Club. A memorial plaque will be unveiled at the School of Scottish Studies on his birthday, and there will be a symposium at the university in December, followed by a concert in the Queen's Hall. His collected poems will be published by Berlin before the year ends. There is, however, something fitting about this particular tribute in our national parliament. The folk revival in which Hamish was so pivotal changed Scotland. It began a steady, subtle growth of national self-confidence, which led eventually to the opening of this Parliament. And it's appropriate that we honour him here, in this way, on this day. Thank you very much.
Now, I know I'm a right killjoy here, but could I ask those in the public gallery not to show appreciation or otherwise through the proceedings of the Parliament? And maybe we could all have a collective cheer at the end. We move now on to the open debate and speeches of around 4 minutes, please. Can I have Maureen Watt, followed by Alexander Stewart?
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to be able to be taking part in this debate tonight, and I thank my colleague Joan McAlpine for lodging this motion and for bringing this motion to debate tonight, celebrating Hamish Henderson. His contribution to Scotland's cultural heritage has been immense, and it's perhaps not as well known as it should be, and we have the opportunity tonight to remedy that in a small way. Again, as I understand that you, Presiding Officer, took part in such a debate to mark his passing in 2002. I feel immensely privileged to have met Hamish Henderson. He came to my hometown of Keith to the first ever TSMA Music Festival. And it was, as I say, the first one, which has now become an annual fixture in the TSMA calendar. And, of course, Keith is now the Scots language tune, and the North East still is the home of traditional music, bothy ballads, and I can say that the Scots heritage of the North East is still very strong, and pupils from in and around Keith are always the winners at Burns festivals and the like. As far as I can recall, it was in the late 60s. I think I'd just started university, and it was an excellent night in June when we sat singing folk songs well into the night, and I ended walking the 2 miles home in the dawn light. He was a very tall man, as I recall, with a great head of white hair and a moustache, and he always wore a trademark brown suit, and he just blended into the ceilidh rather than dominate the proceedings. Also there were Belle Stewart and her daughter Sheila, and I think we'll be forever indebted to Hamish Henderson for recording the oral traditions of Scotland's travelling folk like Belle and Sheila, and the songs of the Scots language. And I think we should congratulate Edinburgh University for supporting the compilation of all that he recorded, and for the work that they continued to do in Scottish studies. I was also fascinated by his distinguished service during the Second World War. He was a proficient linguist, and as Joan McAlpine said, he was there in Sicily during the evacuation, which prompted the famous Banks of Sicily. And his experience at Monte Cassino interested me because I used to work with a German soldier who'd been captured at Monte Cassino and was a prisoner of war in Scotland, and he stayed here for the rest of his life. So that resonance for me also made me interested in listening to Hamish Henderson. So I'm delighted, Presiding Officer, that we have the opportunity during this debate this evening to recognise Hamish Henderson's huge contribution to capturing Scotland's rich cultural heritage. And I look forward to listening to people who probably know a hell of a lot more than I do later on this evening. Thank you very much.
Alexander Stewart, followed by Alex Neil.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to Joan McAlpine's members' business debate this evening and congratulate her on bringing it to the Chamber. As we've already heard, the 11th of November 2019 will mark the centenary of the birth of Dr. Hamish Henderson. During his life, it's acknowledged that he is a scholar, a poet, a songwriter, a catalyst of Scotland's folk revival. Born in Blairgowrie in Perthshire, Hamish was, despite what many think of him later in his life, had a very esteemed military career. He was always a compassionate man. As a youngster, Henderson won a scholarship, we've heard, at Dulwich College, but unfortunately his mother died. But that didn't stop him from progressing and ensuring that he did get the opportunity to go to Daniel College in Cambridge. And during his time at Cambridge, he had many visits to Germany in the early 1930s. And he began running messages and money back and forward because he was not at all admired by the Nazi Germany. And he supported individuals and smuggled Jews out of Germany during that time. And throughout his life, he was seen as a man who had a strong emphasis on peace. However, as he matured and further saw that the accessibility of peace was not what was happening in that time in Europe, he immersed himself in the war effort. Hamish was a first-class individual, and initially he joined the British Army Pioneer Corps as a sergeant before he gained the Queen's Commission of an Intelligence Corps. He became an effective officer due to his command of 6 European languages, and acquired an in-depth knowledge of culture in Germany. And not long after that, he took up his time in Africa during the war. And it's during that time that Hamish's biographer, Timothy Need, suggested that an in-depth knowledge of the history of St Andrew's Cross may indeed have been responsible for the famous saltire in the sky created by the searchlights which signalled the Highland Division's attack at El Alamein. Whilst in North Africa, he began to look at the epic poem and started to express about ordinary soldiers. This was reflected in the most accomplished poetry that he had, the elegies of the dead in Sardinia. That itself showed that the war and the deep humane opportunities and the waste of young men he put into that. And that gave him the opportunity of expressing that. And he, throughout his life, saw the opportunities that were there. And his poems and his work enhanced that, and he won many accolades for his poetry and many prizes. Although Hamish Henderson is often accused of being a communist, he never actually joined the Communist Party. He was far too much of an internationalist to fall into any of those party lines. And indeed, when he did return to Italy after the war, he was eventually told to leave the country because of his views and opinions. And Hamish is still remembered there with great fondness as a military and culture liberator of that day, and Hamish Henderson Club in Rome is still there today for folk. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, it is only right and proper that someone who made such a contribution is recognised for that contribution, wherever it is in his military career, in his songwriting, in his poetry, or anything that he did to involve culture in Scotland. Hamish's legacy is the talent and the contribution to the Scottish society cannot be underestimated. And it's to say, it's only right and proper that we have this opportunity this evening to recognise that talent and to recognise his contribution to Scottish society. Thank you.
Alex Neil, followed by Elaine Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by congratulating Joan McAlpine on managing to secure this members' debate, which I think properly recognises the huge contribution to Scottish society that Hamish Henderson made. Can I say I'm in the fortunate position, like Maureen Watt, of having met Hamish on a number of occasions. The first time I actually met him was in 1976 in one of his favourite pubs in Edinburgh, which fortunately was one of my favourite pubs in Edinburgh as well, because he had joined the so-called breakaway Scottish Labour Party, which I think in his eyes combined the best of what he believed in politically, which was a socialist-type society, but also promoting Scotland and all things Scottish as part of his internationalism. And I always remember, and it's stuck in my mind all these years, in the conversation, admittedly after maybe one or two drinks, I actually said to him, why are you so much in favour of Scottish independence? He says, well, actually, I've got two objectives, and then I want a cultural revival in Scotland, and I think culturally we're already becoming independent, and it's only natural that we eventually become politically independent. So I said, what are your two objectives? What would you like to happen in an independent Scotland that's not happening today? And he said, well, the first thing is, I want to abolish the Sunday Post and the People's Friend. So, and let me say, I'm quoting Hamish in case anybody, the editors, are listening to this. And I said, well, why do you want to abolish the Sunday Post and the People's Friend? And he said, because the Kailyard mentality that they promote in Scotland is not my kind of Scotland, and it's not the kind of Scotland or society I want to live in or have our children grow up in. So I was totally convinced. I told Jim Sillars we should write into the manifesto for the SLP the abolition of the Sunday Post and the People's Friend. So I then said, Hamish, what is your second objective? And he said to get rid of Glasgow Celtic and Glasgow Rangers. And that in a way was an even more serious point, because while he was in a sense semi-joking about getting rid of Celtic and Rangers. What he wanted to do was rid Scotland of the sectarianism, which particularly at that time was far, far too prevalent, still too prevalent today. But he did not believe in sectarianism. He took people as they were. He didn't judge individuals. Unless, of course, there were people who did things and believed in things that he thought was alien to the culture of Scotland. And I always remember, before joining the SLP, I was very friendly with the late Norman and Janie Buchan, both of whom, in their own ways, had also made a tremendous contribution to the revival of folk music and to the culture, particularly in the northeast of Scotland, but not exclusively the northeast of Scotland. And of course, Hamish, given his background, but even as a man in his teens and his 20s, he lived a very nomadic life. He didn't, and I don't think until he got married, he probably had a house of his own. I'm not sure about that. But he lived in other people's houses and travelled round the country. And the Buchans might go in of an evening. I think he had a key to the house in Peel Street in Glasgow, and in line there was Hamish, stretched out, fast asleep, enjoying himself, and they never knew how long he would stay. But they had the utmost love and respect for Hamish because he was such a giant. When the history of the 20th century Scotland comes to be written, in terms of cultural Scotland, there will probably be two giants, and that's Hugh McDermid and Hamish Henderson. And of course, they themselves had quite a sometimes difficult relationship, but at the end of the day had the highest respect, I think, and love for each other. So I think Hamish Henderson deserves to be celebrated, not just in this debate, not just in the event that's taking place after this. I think Hamish Henderson is a giant of Scotland, but he's also an international giant as well. He fought against fascism. He fought for the underdog. Anyone else who had his background and his upbringing, the strength of his personality and the kind of early life he had, which is one of the most difficult, challenging early lives probably anybody had, and the way he grew into the massive hero and champion he was when he died for a long time before that, I think shows that he was a remarkable individual and a lovely human being.
Elaine Smith, followed by Claire Adams.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Joan McAlpine for securing this debate tonight. It's difficult, obviously, to follow personal reminiscence of Alec Neil, but I'll put my points on the debate, on the record. I think it is important that Scotland's Parliament remembers a towering figure in 20th century Scottish life. And although Hamish Henderson wasn't with those of us that were at the opening of the Scottish Parliament, he was reportedly delighted that his friend Sheena Wellington stole the show with a rendition of A Man's a Man for all that, a song which encapsulated both the cultural traditions that he did so much to revive and the egalitarian political views with which he identified. And his own stirring words are to be found in the official report of this Parliament, because in March 27th, 2002, in a debate on her motion marking his passing, my good friend and colleague, the former Labour MSP Cathy Peaty, sang a verse from Freedom Come All Ye. Probably something we're not encouraging these days, Presiding Officer, singing in the chamber. Hamish Henderson was one of the most important contributors to Scottish culture and identity in the 20th century and left a legacy that goes beyond that, and this is evidenced, I think, by the contributions of members during this debate. His commitment to the recording of folk music, the oral tradition and the way that the songs reflected the lives of the people who sang them reveal his wider views on culture, that it belongs to the people and that the cultural contributions of real people should be nurtured and not sidelined. And I understand that this is very much in his mind when he founded the Edinburgh People's Festival. His poems and songs tackled the political issues of the time, many of which still affect us today, including opposing nuclear weapons, supporting the campaign for nuclear disarmament and campaigning on issues of land ownership and access, and he was also a committed anti-apartheid campaigner. A committed socialist and internationalist, we have heard already, that expressed his horror at what he described as the servile complicity of Britain during the Vietnam War. In a letter to the Scotsman, he stated that this war was the first in which 90% of the casualties were civilian, and unfortunately, when we reflect on subsequent conflicts, civilian casualties have been similarly high. He enlisted to fight in the Second World War against the forces of fascism that clashed so strongly with his own political views. And as already touched upon, he was a man who supported many great and worthy causes throughout his life, including the Clydeside ship workers and the miners. In a letter to the Tribune newspaper, he warned, and if I might quote, that socialism will not be fashioned in a vacuum. It will be fashioned by the painful and difficult struggles of definite communities in definite places. It will be achieved on farms and in workshops, in mines and in shipyards, and not only by courtesy of an Act of Parliament. And of course, also as noted in Joan's motion, Hamish translated the prison diaries of Antonio Gramsci. Hamish taught at Edinburgh University for over 35 years, and I understand that representatives of the university are in Parliament today and are of course welcome. And his legacy continues with over 9,000 recordings, 10,000 letters from almost 3,500 correspondents, and his diaries dating from the 1930s to the end of his life, all of which were acquired by Edinburgh University and are kept in their special collections. Interestingly, and I understand to his surprise, he was offered an OBE in the 1980s by Margaret Thatcher's government. Somewhat less surprising is that he rejected that honour. He continues to be honoured in a far greater way today. His contributions to Scotland's culture, tradition and politics continue to profoundly influence our country. And as Cathy Peaty said in this chamber in 2002, Hamish was an authentic voice of Scotland. We would do well to remember his work and carry it forward into the 21st century. Well, over 17 years on, this debate highlights that we are doing exactly that. Thank you.
Claire Adamson, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also thank Joan McAlpine for bringing this debate to the Chamber this evening. It's a real honour to be able to speak in it. I knew the songs of Hamish Henderson before I knew about the man. I wasn't lucky enough to meet him, but my adulthood was filled with my love of folk music, and while I learned the songs, I'm very pleased that down the years, my friends in the folk scene and the TMSA made me aware of Hamish the man and his incredible contribution to the social history of our country, culture and politics, and so well detailed by my colleagues in the Chamber this evening. Hamish's influence in Scotland is palpable in so many walks of life. In demonstration with me, I have a recent publication from July this year from the All Under One Banner March in Ayr called Songs for Independence. Can I say that only Hamish and Rabbie Burns get 2 songs in it? It features a John McLean march and a song which I would like to talk about because it has had a great influence on me, Freedom Come All Ye. Whether it was being sung so poignantly and beautifully by Pumeza Matsikiza at the Commonwealth Games, or in a communal singing at a folk festival, or dare I say, an impromptu sing-song in Queensberry House in here, it is one that has personally touched me, and I'll seek to explain why. A few years ago, my son asked me what I wanted to do for Mother's Day, and I asked that he come with me to gather and protest outside Dungaville Detention Centre. Son said, I was expecting flowers or chocolates, but he came with me. And can I say that we joined the peace and justice movement, and others gathered to show solidarity for those detained on Scottish soil. Over the years, the focus of this protest has changed. And Presiding Officer, I know you've been attending for many more years than I have, but it's gone from challenging dawn raids, from challenging the fact that in a country where we have a minimum wage, G4 were using detainees as labour on slavery wages to maintain centres. Highlighting mothers being fined for feeding their bairns a biscuit in the middle of the night. And this year, highlighting the terrible circle evictions of people in Glasgow. Not in my name, and I hope it's not too presumptuous to say, I believe not in Hamish Henderson's name. At these gatherings down the years, we always sing Freedom Come All Ye. My son's now a music graduate, and it's part of his repertoire because he was so moved by hearing it in that location on that day. And never more have those lyrics been more powerful than outside that blight on Scotland that is Dungavel. It's a song of protest, it's a song of solidarity and humanity, but most of all, it gives me hope. The hope that in Scotland, in our house, all the bairns of Adam will find breed, barley bee and painted room. Thank you, President.
The last of the open debate contributions is from John Finney.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. Can I commence by congratulating Joan on bringing this motion here? It's to mark the centenary of the birth of Hamish Henderson, and that's most certainly worthy of recognition. And I might throughout just mention some of for people listening and maybe aren't cited in the motion, some of the text of the motion, and who it considers was one of the most brilliant Scots of his age, as it says in the motion, and that indeed was repeated by Joan. And that may be seen by many to be a very bold statement. I don't think anyone who has any grasp or knowledge of Mr Henderson would think that's the case, and it's one I fully endorse, and the value of our culture and respect of others that was shown there, I think, is important. Then lists in the motion his various professions, or what would you call them? Poet, scholar, songwriter, folklorist, co-founder, and so on. And goes on to talk about being a catalyst of Scotland's post-war folk revival. I think the fact that something needed revived suggests that there was something a wee bit adrift. I think it's perhaps the modest psyche that Scots have, that our traditions perhaps aren't worthy. Mentions be made of bothy ballads. I think the oral tradition is very, very important, certainly is for Gaels. I think that revival was and remains connected with the growing confidence we have as a nation. And that's a confidence, it's not a cockiness, it's a confidence that is just an appreciation, and Hamish certainly personified that. Whether it's the rich heritage of the Gaeltacht or not just geographic communities, I think also communities of interest, farming, fishing, mining, of course, the travellers. And I think the connection with the travellers, and I spoke in the previous debate and indeed mentioned travellers and the very good work that the Scottish Government's done in relation to that. And important because there's a relationship being built up there, and that's the credit of Minister Hamish Stewart. Clearly, and as someone who works with the traveller community, I know that people within that community are understandably lack trust. Hamish earned that trust, and he earned the respect because of how he went about his general demeanour. And I also had the good fortune to see the documentary on him a couple of times, and I think his demeanour is very important because he was authoritative but without being in any way arrogant, and some of the things, the World War II was a small passage of his life. I happen to think it would make a very excellent film, never mind the documentary, and it is about his bearing. He was not in any way threatening. He was a warm person, and people have talked about his distinguished service and the surrender, and that was not about humiliation. What I saw, that was about a warmth and an engagement and a human level. Now, I'm not what would be considered a well-read man at all, but I have an appreciation of Hamish's use of language. And the pictures he painted of real folk and that warmth and humanity. And that's a warmth and humanity clearly would have been clearly tested in the theatre of war, but he never waned from his position. His involvement with the Workers' Education Association and the People's Festival, these are great organisations, and I think they epitomise the outlook and his sense of community. And people have already mentioned the field recordings. And I think that's a rich source and a heritage. I've mentioned about the travellers. I think that can't be underestimated. And the engagement there is very, very positive and indeed lasting, with the names Bell Stewart and Jeannie Robertson, obviously. The motion goes on to say, considers that Hamish wrote many beloved folk songs, including Freedom Come All You. I have to tell you that it's sung at the Scottish Green Party conference. Sung hesitatingly by me, not because I don't like it, because it is very broad Scots for a Highlander. And of course, Hamish touches on that with the John McLean mark, with his reference to the different communities in Scotland, including Big Heelan Tuchters. And I'm certainly that. So I like the Tonight at Noon's version. I like Dick Gaughan's version of it. I'm a big fan of Dick Gaughan, who, of course, also performs the 51st Highlanders' Farewell to Sicily. And pipe tune, and I recall from the documentary Hamish diddling along to that when he was explaining the basis to it. So he'll be fondly remembered me. I loved his humanity. I loved that he had regard for his homeland and that he wanted to make things better, and others have alluded to that. So whether it was apartheid or nuclear disarmament, I imagine he'd be with Claire Adamson at Dungavel, protesting there as many as have done. I imagine he would be repulsed by the rape clause, the siege of Gaza, things like that. The motion talks about him being a visionary talent, and I think we don't appreciate people. We don't appreciate people in the time. We maybe appreciate them retrospectively. I mentioned Dick Gaughan. Another person like that is the late Andy M. Stewart, who I think wasn't well known on his own. So the contribution that made to Scottish culture was immense, and we certainly won't forget Hamish. Thank you very much.
I now call Fiona Hislop to respond to the debate. For as long as you like, Cabinet Secretary, really.
But I'm not singing. Presiding Officer, I'm very grateful to Jo McAlpine for bringing forward this motion and securing the debate today, and for her wonderful tribute. I'd also like to thank the various contributors for their contributions. Maureen Watt spoke of her personal meeting and reflection. Alec Neil, in another personal and entertaining contribution, celebrated Hamish Henderson's internationalism and praised him as a hero of Scotland. It is important that this Parliament remembers Dr Hamish Henderson, one of the most influential Scots of the past century, and recognises his significant achievements that have influenced and shaped Scotland and beyond. This isn't the first time that Hamish Henderson has been the focus of debate in this Parliament. We recorded our appreciation of his lifetime devotion to international solidarity, peace and socialism, and his many contributions to Scottish culture and politics shortly after his death in March 2002. Back in 2011, we debated the 60th anniversary of the Edinburgh People's Festival, Ceilidh, set up by Hamish and its legacy. Hamish Henderson has also an enduring legacy with the Parliament. He played a key role in helping us to attain it and in reviving the confidence of Scotland. But he's also played a key role both in spirit and also indeed in stone. And I'm sure that many of you have reflected on his words in his powerful song, Freedom Come All You, as you've walked past the Canongate Wall of the Parliament. And they are still so relevant today, those words, as Claire Adamson set out so poignantly. I learned the words of Freedom Come All You as a teenager when I lived in Glasgow in Peel Street. But I never met Hamish Henderson or indeed the Buckens. I wish I had. It is appropriate that we remember and celebrate Hamish Henderson on the centenary of his birth. Centenaries are important times for us to consider and reflect on people and events that have had a profound impact on shaping our lives, our history and our country, and to consider their legacy. There are a number of events arranged around Hamish Henderson's centenary, including another parliamentary event this evening, and I believe that they will help to raise the profile of this exceptional man. Hamish Henderson changed Scotland forever in the way we think of ourselves, our culture and our nation. He made an impact in every avenue where he turned his attention to in his polymath career, whether as a folklorist and a folk revivalist, a poet, a songwriter, political activist, translator, and public intellectual. He was a visionary, a revivalist, a political activist, and a folk hero. Alexander Stewart reflected importantly on his experience of the war and how that influenced his work. Central to his life and legacy was the School of Scottish Studies in the University of Edinburgh, where he taught from 1951 until his retirement in 1987. And I want to quote the words of one of Hamish's colleagues, Callum MacLean, brother of the poet Sorley MacLean, which tell us much about the importance of the oral tradition, the songs, the stories and traditional tales in Scots and Gaelic that Hamish and his colleagues were collecting. I quote, "There are two histories of every land and people. The written history that tells us what is considered politic to tell, and the unwritten history that tells us everything." Hamish found outstanding tradition bearers in his native Perthshire and beyond that had a wealth of traditional lore that was not held or remembered by the settled population. And he always spoke passionately of his work with the travelling community, including the Stuarts of Blairgowrie, which so readily accepted him into their community, as John Finney set out. He always said that the biggest achievement in his life was discovering Jeannie Robertson, one of the most acclaimed folk singers in the world. And he was able to give these tradition bearers a voice. He was able to give their community and others recognition and to be accepted by society. Elaine Smith.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. It was actually slightly remiss of me in my own speech not to mention the fact that the presiding officer was the first open debate speaker in Cathy Peaty's debate, and she may recall that she did actually mention that we shouldn't forget the tradition of the Gypsy travelling community. So I merely intervened to put that on the record, Cabinet Secretary.
And as the presiding officer would say, that is now on the record. And I thank Elizabeth for reflecting our own presiding officer's contribution and love of Hamish Henderson and her experience as well. And that was a point I was coming to, that Elaine Smith, I think, reflected on that really important part of Hamish Henderson's work and also on his politics, because, as she said, the Hamish's collecting work not only ensured that all this traditional lore would be safeguarded for future generations in the school's archives, but that it would be brought to a much wider audience. He was considered to be the father of the folk song revival, and he did so much to ensure that the carrying stream of tradition continues. So I'm grateful for all the work that Hamish Henderson undertook. He contributed significantly to the truly vibrant folk culture, especially around music and song that we now have today. Traditional musicians and singers play an important part in our music scene. We have figures that are nationally and internationally known and renowned. And we're able to provide first-class training for them at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. Its traditional music course is the UK's only Bachelor of Music degree dedicated to traditional and folk music, a course which I encouraged the Funding Council to support when it was established when I was Education Secretary. Professor Margaret Bennett, one of the lecturers, was a contemporary of Hamish. Hamish thought that she, I quote, embodies the spirit of Scotland, and I agree. In Glasgow, Celtic Connections is the largest winter festival in the world. UK's premier celebration of Celtic music has now run for 26 years, and it plays an important role in promoting our traditional and contemporary culture. It helps to promote artistic links and cultural exchanges across countries and to share our traditions, an important aspect of the People's Festival Ceilidh that Hamish was involved in. And we're able to support her historic languages that were so central to the lore that Hamish was collecting. We recognise that the Scots language is an integral part of Scotland's heritage, our national identity and our current cultural life. We support the Scottish language dictionaries, which for many years were housed in the School of Scottish Studies in George Square, and we're also encouraging Scots writers and publishers. Hamish Henderson recognised that our culture was always evolving and changing, and it's important that it is available and easily accessible for our current and also our future generations to enjoy. The School of Scottish Studies continues to play an important role in this regard. Our national collections, including the National Library of Scotland, unlocking our sound heritage and the Scotland Moving Image Archives are also important. But, Presiding Officer, I'm delighted today to announce that the Scottish Government will this year be giving £30,000 to the Tober and Dalkas project, which includes recordings from the School of Scottish Studies. I'm proud that we've been able to support the project since 2010. I've taken a personal interest and I recognise the important work that the project team has undertaken. Hamish Henderson's devotion to Scotland, and especially to its traditional cultures, has left a remarkable legacy for us today. And it's important that we continue to recognise, to value his contribution, but probably more importantly, to ensure that we value, protect and nurture our culture, the spirit, the values of what he communicated in those very, very precious words. They say so much about who we are and everything that we do as a country, but probably, as Claire Adams has said, everything we hope to be in our country. So I congratulate everyone who has taken part in this debate this afternoon. I wish everyone every success with the Hamish Henderson Centenary events. Hamish Henderson, Hero of Scotland.
Okay then. That concludes the debate and this meeting is closed.